Two of my friends were over and they were like freaking out. Like, what is that, Natalie? Like, your house really is haunted. I thought to myself that this was somehow some sort of gift from God and I was supposed to harness that. And then I realized I had the ability to see and hear spirits that were connecting to me. I thought that it would help bring people peace. I talked to a lot of people who lost their children. One time I had a vision the night before a session. She immediately lifted her head. Her eyes were jet black. And in this deep, dark, creepy voice, she said, "Keep talking about my mother."
Hello and welcome back to the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today's guest is a former medium who became interested in mediumship because of her experiences growing up in a haunted house. We talked about what that was like and then went over how she became able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. It's a fascinating roller coaster of emotions, so you'll definitely want to stick to the end. With that said, let's get right into the action and immerse ourselves in the life story of today's guest, Natalie.
Okay, so my father's house growing up, right? Very haunted house. It didn't necessarily affect any of the other family members. It was mostly attacking me because everybody was shocked when I would tell them what was going on with me. So the earliest memory I have, I was about 5 or 6 years old. I went into a closet with my little brother and we were playing hide and go seek. And I felt a hand on my shoulder. And I remember I turned to him and said, "Do you have your hand on my shoulder?" And he said, "No." And so I put my hand over top of the hand that was on my shoulder. The hand was like adult size. It wasn't little, but when I put my hand there, I could still feel my hand and the other hand. But there was nothing there. Like, I was able to touch my shoulder. So I automatically freaked out, jumped out, ran out of the room. That was one of the first experiences I ever had. So there was another time as well. My brother used to play hockey when we were kids, and him and my dad would leave the house, so I would be left alone in the house. And I remember I was watching TV. I heard like a huge crash downstairs. And I got really scared. I thought someone broke into my house. We lived out in the country also, so it was very quiet out there. And the panic started settling in. My heart was beating. I actually went and grabbed a butcher knife. I was so scared. I thought someone had broken into my house. So I decided, I don't know where I got this from, but I was like, I'm going to go check downstairs. Logically, right? Something must have fallen. Maybe my cat jumped on a shelf and knocked something over. So I went downstairs. I went to go look in the house. There was nothing there. Nothing had fallen over. And it was a huge crash. So I was looking through the rooms. I went to the back of the room in the basement, flipped on the light, and the light bulb burnt out. Like, it exploded. Just this big, and right then and there, I was like, okay. I just turned around and walked back upstairs. While I'm upstairs, again, I still have this butcher knife. I'm scared at this point, obviously. I don't know what's going on. Then I start hearing something else, like a weird noise, a zooming noise, like. This is when I decide to call my friend. I call her on the phone. I'm so scared. I'm holding this butcher knife. I'm terrified. I'm asking her, my house is haunted. I'm telling her, I don't know what to do. I'm hearing noises and bangs and the light bulb burnt out. Then I'm hearing it again, the noise. It's stopping and going and stuff. I realize it's coming from upstairs in the hallway. So I walk over to this hallway. It's a dark hallway leading to a back room. I decide, okay, I have to go see, I walk down this hallway, turn on the light to the room, and my brother's toy remote control car is spinning in a circle by itself. And I'm just staring at it like I'm in complete shock. Logically, right? I'm thinking in my head, there's someone that broke into my house, came into the room, and is using the remote control to. So I'm looking in the closets for this remote control to figure out who's controlling it. I'm so scared at this point. And eventually I turn to the car and I flip the car over and it stops. And I'm freaking out. I run back to the phone call. I'm still talking to my friend, like, oh my God, my house is so haunted. And then the car starts going again. So I have to go inside of the room, pull the batteries out of the car. I put the batteries down, and I'm like, okay, if this turns on again, like I'm going insane. So I run back out into the living room and I sit there. Eventually, my brother and my dad show up. And when they showed up, I remember telling them, something in this house does not like me. And they just kind of laughed it off, like, oh, Natalie again, because I was always telling these stories of haunting. I was so terrified. And so that was one evening. And then a separate time, I was working out down in my basement. And, working out, I was young, and I go upstairs because I forget. I think I was making food, or the phone rang or something. So I ran upstairs. And when I went back to go back downstairs to go work out again, I went to go inside the room, and the door was locked from the inside. So I had left the door open. So something had closed the door and locked it from the inside. So I couldn't get back in. Things like that were happening to me all the time. I was also unfortunately plagued with something called sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is when your brain, I'm diagnosed with this as well, just so you know, but it's when you're still sleeping, but your body wakes up. So your brain is technically asleep and your body is completely paralyzed while you're sleeping. While you're laying down, I can open up my eyes, and basically I'm still in like a dream-like state. And in these dream-like states, it's kind of like having a real life nightmare. But oftentimes I only ever see very, very demonic things. One time I woke up from this, and I had seen a lady, an old lady, and she had sharp teeth, and she was like just very demonic on top of me. I've had many instances also hearing voices, my parents' voices asking me to come help them. And then when I finally get up and out of this sleep paralysis, I'll ask them, did you call my name? And they'll say no. And I also see a lot of shadowy figures during this time. My dad's house was so terrifying. Even my friends would come over. And I remember there was bangs like on the walls and stuff in my basement. And two of my friends were over, and they were like freaking out. Like, what is that, Natalie? Like, where's that coming from? Like, your house really is haunted. And I was like, oh, it's nothing. That happens all the time. Like, to me, it was so normal, these experiences that I was having on a weekly basis, at least, if not daily basis. Bangs on the walls. And so they ended up leaving my house because of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I understand them. I probably would have done the same thing. I have a few questions about the stories that you shared. You shared, a bunch of different stories. The first one I want to touch on is the car zooming. So it's a RC, like remote control car. It doesn't turn by itself, right? So for the car to be able to turn, you need to turn the joystick or whatever, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it had like a remote control to it. It was just a car with a remote control, and you would use the manual like controls to make it spin around.
Okay, and so somehow the remote or the car was being controlled by something, and it was able to spin, which you're not supposed to be able to do, but potentially, maybe the remote is like has the joystick stuck in that position or whatever. But when you flipped the car over and you left, it started up again. Did you mean that the car flipped itself back and it started like driving around again? Is that what you meant?
No, when I flipped the car over, like upside down, it was laying on the carpet. And basically the wheels just started like turning again.
Oh, okay.
So it stopped. Like it kept stopped going. I had to take the batteries out.
Okay.
Because it just was freaking me out so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot. But in the beginning, you said that most of these things would happen to you and not to the rest of your family. But it obviously wasn't just you, because when your friends came over, they were also freaked out and they heard some of these things as well. So I don't really understand how that works, but it's quite complicated, at least to me, to figure out how these things function. How could you have heard and seen all these things, but then your family wasn't hearing nearly as much. So I'm very curious about that. You also talked about sleep paralysis, and you talked about one lady, but I don't know if you can really call that a lady, like someone with sharp teeth. But so you're saying your eyes were open. You saw that with your physical eyes?
Yes. Yeah. So I would see like full figures of things as well growing up. And specifically only at my dad's house. It was more like present, more. So I would see it. It was like a full figure, like you standing in front of me. Same
Wow.
thing.
Okay. And I also forgot to ask about this. How old were you when these things were happening?
Okay. So the time that I had my hand, when I was in the closet, I was about 6 to 7 years old. And when my brother would go to hockey, I was probably around like 10. So when he was at hockey practice and like the things would be crashing and the car was zooming around the room, I was about 10.
Okay.
And also the demonic like lady that I would see, probably around 10, 11 years old. I found there was a big boom in demonic activity after I played with a Ouija board, actually. So around the sixth grade, around 10, 11, 12 years old. And I'll give you another example as well. So one time I was sleeping downstairs in my basement, and this man, like I felt the energy of a man. I don't know if it was a man or not, but it was pitch black in the room, so I couldn't see anything. And I woke up in the middle of the night around 3 in the morning, which I do often also. That hour I find is very like active. And I basically heard footsteps sliding back and forth from one side of the room to the other. It came right beside my head, so I really heard it. It was very loud. And then I also heard against my dehumidifier was like patting noises, like banging. And it was so loud, just this pacing and then this bang on my humidifier. I actually got up in the middle of the night. I crawled to the next room to turn the light on. So I crawled on the floor to the next room. The light turned on. Nothing in the room. There was nobody there. All the noise stopped the second I turned the light on. So I thought to myself, maybe the cat's in here. So I started looking for the cat. I walked upstairs to go sleep upstairs because I was just so afraid. And I actually heard the cat meowing outside. So I opened the door and like my cat's outside. So I knew that nobody was downstairs. The cat was not there. I ended up going to sleep upstairs in my room. And I was scared the whole night. And these sleep paralysis, they just got deeper and heavier after the Ouija board experience that I had.
Whenever there's Ouija boards or evil spirit activity, most of the time there's other stuff happening in the psyche. And when I say that, I mean like many times it's accompanied with anxiety or with depression or suicidal thoughts or illnesses and things like that. So in your life outside of the house, did any of that follow you around?
Honestly, not really. It was mainly happening around my dad, in my dad's home. The only time I can think was once I almost drowned when I was around 11, and that was at my mom's house and not my dad's house. And that was a really spiritual experience too. I was like this close to dying. I was swimming in my pool that we had, and I swam in between the ladder, and I got stuck. So I got stuck, and I remember I was looking up, and the sun was shining, and everything went white, and the sunlight went to my eyes. And I remember thinking, I have to breathe in now, and I'm going to breathe in water like this is it. And that last second, I felt somebody's hands pull me out. And to this day, like, I mean, there was nothing there. There was nobody there. I was completely stuck. And I was just on the verge of having to breathe again. I held my breath as long as I could. And I felt arms around me, pull me, like tug me a tiny bit, and it got me loose, and I just got out. And there were incidences where I was like almost died. Like I almost got hit by a car too around my mom's house as well. I was biking and I didn't I couldn't figure out the brakes on the bike, and I flew in front of a car. And luckily the car like slammed their brakes 2 seconds, like they would have hit me. Luckily the lady noticed. So there was kind of incidences like that, I would say, where near death experiences.
Okay. So far, up until that point, I think you're around 10, 11, 12, like you mentioned. And most of these things are happening to you. You're not engaging in any kind of witchcraft or anything like that. That eventually changed, but there's a big event that happened in between where you almost died, and probably even more serious than the two that you already just mentioned. So can you talk about what happened to you?
Yeah, so in about 7th grade, I started to become really sick. I was only 13 actually, because I had gotten my first job, believe it or not, at 13. I was working about a couple of weeks. And I started to get really sick, really, really, really tired every day. I would come home from school and have to sleep. I couldn't focus at school, and I started to stop eating. I couldn't eat more than an egg like a day at one point, and I knew something was wrong. Then I started developing these very severe migraines, headaches, and stomach pains. And one day I was at my mom's house, and she looked at me and said, I have to take you to the hospital. It had been like a month of me being sick, and I didn't want to go. I told her, no, like I was scared to go, I think. And I had a very high fever. So she told me, I'm going to take you to the hospital. We went to the hospital. I remember the nurse was so sweet. I was kind of delirious, honestly, but she had put a little coat over top of me, like the uniforms that the hospitals give to patients. And I had such a high fever that within like 2 minutes, the entire coat was completely wet. That's how bad of it. I had a fever about 104 for days. So she had changed the clothing, and they started giving me Tylenol, Advil, but none of the doctors could figure out what I had. I was the mystery patient. I was admitted to the hospital. They put me in my own room, and I just started to get worse and worse by the day. I ended up for me, I don't remember about a week in the hospital. I kind of blacked out, in and out. I remember the light. I had such a bad migraine that the light even caused like so much pain. I would cry. And I wasn't eating. And I knew it got really bad when a nurse came to me one day and she said, look, if you don't eat, we're going to have to put a tube down your throat and force feed you. And that was the moment something shifted for me. And I thought to myself, I have to eat. I'm not getting a tube down my throat. So I told my mom, please get my grandmother to make me my favorite food. It was like this dip that she would make. And I was like, that's the only thing I'll eat. So she brought me that, and I started to eat slowly. And at that point, for whatever reason, I just slowly started to recover. I had every test you could possibly imagine: spinal taps, x-rays, MRIs. Doctors had no idea. They had a doctor come from Montreal even to monitor me, and he had no idea either. So what happened is I was getting a tiny bit better, but I was still obviously very, very sick. And my mom had given me a journal while I was in the hospital. And on the back page, I wrote down on that journal that I didn't want to die. And I kept saying that in my head, like, I don't want to die. I just wasn't ready to die. And I heard a voice talk back very loudly in my head and said, are you sure? I remember thinking that, who is that? And I just said, I knew right away it was God within that moment. And I said, yes, I'm sure. And he told me, I can come take you. The angels will come and get you. And it will be painless. And you'll be gone. Or you can stay. And he said, but you're going to have a hard life. And I paused for a moment. I genuinely debated it. The reason I didn't go was my dad. I didn't want to leave my dad alone. I knew that if I was gone, that would ruin my dad. And my brother really needed him. My sister, they needed him. And I was very close with my dad. So I thought, if I'm gone, my dad's going to drink himself to death. Really, that's what I felt. So I told God that I wanted to stay. And I stayed. And I slowly got better. It was a miracle in a way, because I got discharged from the hospital eventually. And about 2 weeks later, I had a checkup on my heart. And they noticed something. I had an inflammation in my heart. A normal heart. So I had an inflammation of my artery. I have a coronary aneurysm. That's the diagnosis. And the inflammation was quite large. So they sent me right away to the children's hospital. That's 4 hours from where I live. And they told me, we think you had Kawasaki disease. Kawasaki disease is pretty rare. It usually only happens between boys from 1 year old to 5 years old. And it usually doesn't happen to 12-year-old girls, 13-year-old girls. It's very rare. And it's very rare that it causes the heart condition. Basically, if you don't cure or get treatment for the condition, it will start attacking your organs until it kills you. Luckily, literally, it was like a miracle. It didn't kill me. It caused a permanent heart condition. And we were able to catch it. And the doctor basically said, because of this heart condition, we can now diagnose that that's what you had. But I received no treatment. My body cured it on its, it cured it on its own, other than leaving me with a permanent heart condition.
Wow. So from being, I don't know, how long did you stay in the hospital? Did you say?
It was about 2 months.
So from 2 months with all the tests, they couldn't figure out what it was, and you never got any treatment, but somehow you survived a very serious heart condition.
Yes, because Kawasaki disease is an inflammatory disease, and I didn't have any of the typical symptoms. You're supposed to have swollen hands. I didn't have that. I had red eyes. I had a disease in my eyes as well at the time. Fever, migraines, and stomach pains. And it wasn't the traditional diagnostic symptoms for Kawasaki. So I was a mystery patient.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to tell you about our extra content on Locals. It's where you can hear the beginning of our conversations, learn the practical applications of the testimonies, and get hours worth of other bonus content. All of that, plus the regular episodes without any ads. It's free to join, so why don't you come check it out by going to almostfalse.locals.com or by downloading the Locals app. The links are in the description. Now let's get back to the story.
Okay, I want to go back to what you said the voice of God told you. Because he gave you the choice of either going now, dying and going with the angels, or staying and you would have a rough life. And so you chose to stay. So can you explain how your life changed after recovering from that disease?
I remember I had really given my life to God at that point. I had everything to live for. I was very positive. Those years after that, it was kind of when I got to high school, I sort of fell into drugs and alcohol. Mostly marijuana is what I started with, and recreational drugs. I started doing that because I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of probably OCD symptoms that were really, I just had a lot of anxiety, and those medications, not medication, but marijuana helped calm me. So I fell into it so easily. And I think because of the history of addiction in my family, it was something that could help me cope with school, because school was really challenging for me because of all of these problems I was going through. I ended up basically living, it's called couch hopping. So I would just be at someone's house every night instead of home. I was home sometimes, but it was tough. So I really got lost for a long time and just really completely disconnected from God altogether.
And when along your journey did you become interested in mediumship?
Okay, so this was about after high school. I went to college and I sobered up, basically. I stopped doing drugs. I had overdosed at one point. And when I got better, I thought to myself, all of these things that I was experiencing with my haunted house growing up, that this was somehow some sort of gift from God, and I was supposed to harness that. And I started getting into tarot cards. I started practicing that on anybody that was willing to. I offered free readings to anybody. And then I realized I had the ability to see and hear their loved ones, spirits that were connecting to me, which now I understand those are demons. Because if you really pry into them, if you're a medium and you're watching this and you're a psychic medium and you're like, oh no, I'm still talking to the relatives. If you really ask them, like, in the name of Jesus Christ, tell me exactly who you are, they will. And I've done that. So I know that it's not the relatives. They're demons talking to these individuals. And that's what I thought God had gifted me with. I originally thought it was God's gift, and these were spirits that were coming through of loved ones that were trying to display communication with their loved ones that are still alive.
You had good intentions. You didn't understand that back then. So my question is, at that time, apart from thinking that this was a gift from God, why did you want to be a medium? What was the goal in doing that?
Essentially what you just said, I believe that I have like a kind heart, and my goal was to genuinely help people. And that's what I thought I was doing. I didn't believe at the time that I wasn't talking to their relatives. I thought that it would help bring people peace. I talked to a lot of people who lost their children. And it was sort of like a counseling session for them in a lot of ways. I have a counseling background, and I have, in my opinion, a comforting presence, comforting voice. And I was just someone that they could talk to about their loved ones too. And a lot of the sessions that I had, half of it was mostly talking about, memories they had with their loved ones. And they really wanted to connect with that. And I understood that. And I had a lot of respect for what they were going through. And I tried to just be as available to their needs in that way. And I really did think that I was helping them.
Can you explain what mediumship looks like and how it works? Because from most people that are like me that don't see or feel anything in the spirit, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. So can you explain what it looked like for you and how it worked when you would do these sessions with people?
When you space out, like when you close your eyes and picture an apple, I would get that vision while I'm awake, and it would connect to the person that was in front of me. So I would tell them, for example, I see, right now, I see a cross necklace. And then the client would show me a necklace that they were wearing like under their shirt, and it would be like a cross necklace. So these things, just so you know, really are real, that they are connecting, but you're connecting with the bad part of the spiritual realm. In the Bible, it does say to warn you against psychics and stuff, because it is a very real thing. And you are opening a portal to a different world. And for me, I was connecting. I could feel the person's presence with me. So I could feel whether or not it was a male or a female that was coming through to connect with me, sometimes a child or an adult. Some were very difficult to connect to, while others were very communicative. So it would take me a few minutes. I would use different tools like cards, writing, even glass balls.
Oh, really?
Any tool, yeah. I would use anything that was available to me that would put me in a trance or in a days. And I could easily get into those because God, for whatever reason, right, developed my brain that way. And I can get into trances very easily, into like a meditative state, let's call it. You know, when you're sleeping or when you're very relaxed, your mind just thinks. And for a lot of people, they can see. And so I would have a memory from like my childhood, and I would say, I think this happened to that person also. So I would bring up that memory and say, hey, they're telling me this situation. Did this happen to you? And the client will say, yes, that did happen to me. So that's how it worked for me. I'm not positive on how other people receive messages or how they work. That's just me personally. But I know that I had lots of customers. I was getting really popular, and people were telling me that I was very good. And it's one thing, it's sad to say, but I genuinely feel like it's one of the only things that I was really, really good at. And so I thought I was blessed. I thought that this was my path. This is a great thing that I was doing for people, and it was making me a little bit of money on the side. And I wasn't charging too much or being, you know, I would offer free sometimes to people that really needed it. So yeah, I thought I was helping.
That's very interesting. It's difficult to kind of picture, but I think you put it in a pretty simple way, like closing your eyes and getting an image. My question is, would you ever get things wrong about people?
Yes, some people were difficult to read. They were more standoffish. Maybe they were Christian and they prayed to protect themselves from something like myself, because sometimes people came to me, they didn't want to come. Their friends forced them to. Those people were very difficult to read because I think they just didn't want to be read. So the flow of information was very blocked off. So yeah, sometimes it was difficult to read readings, but I think it was my nervousness possibly as well, because if someone was standoffish with me, I would reflect that and I would get nervous.
Okay. So it has a lot to do with the person that you're talking to, with your state of mind. Interesting to try to kind of piece this puzzle together. But I know that you were communicating with spirits because I understand how mediumship works. You mentioned it. Not everyone believes in that. A lot of people think that it's all hoaxes, that you're just making up stuff, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I personally know that that's not the case. But can you explain some of the experiences that you had that kind of convince you that, no, these are actually spirits? Were there times that you communicated with spirits that you could see more clearly than just an image in your eye? Do you remember some of these?
Okay, so one time I had a vision the night before a session, and the vision told me to leave the demon outside of my house. It showed me a picture of my downstairs, and that there was a door and there was a demon behind the door, and told me not to let the demon inside my house. The next day, I just kind of forgot about it for some reason. So I went downstairs when my client came. I only was supposed to have one client, but two ladies showed up. So I stood there at the door thinking, I opened the door, let the two ladies come inside of the house. Now, I told the lady, would you like to come up for the session? And the other lady seemed very eager and very interested also. And I said, are you bringing your friend? And the lady said, oh, I guess she can come upstairs too. So I thought, okay. And her friend jumped in and said, can I have a session also at the same time? And I said, yeah, sure. Like, no problem. So they came upstairs, and I often did friends and I often did people bouncing back to and from. So I focused on the lady, but her friend, there was a lot of energy with her. So I focused on her, and her mom came through. And her mom was there, and I was talking to her, and her mom used to call her princess. So I said, this lady's here, and she's calling her princess. And she got very emotional and said, yeah, that's my mom. That's my mom. And she was listening. And at one point, I just continued talking about her mom, and she put her hands, like she leaned over and put her hands in her head. And I thought, me and her friend thought it was kind of weird. Like she was just kind of intense, and she placed her hands in her head and just leaned forward. And then I continued to talk about her mom, but I started talking about something else. Maybe I switched over to her friend or just started discussing. She immediately like lifted her head. Her eyes were jet black, fully black. And in this deep, dark, creepy voice, she said, "Keep talking about my mother." It was not her voice. It was like a man's voice. This was a little old lady. She was maybe like 50 or 60 years old. And her voice got so deep, and she stared right into my soul, right into my eyes. This black, deep darkness. And I got really scared because I knew right away, like, although I was doing all this mediumship, all this, what I thought was good, I knew what demons were. I still knew Jesus Christ. I was just rejecting everything about him. So right then and there, I knew I was talking to a demon, like a real, genuine, possessed demon person. And I thought to myself in that moment, what do I do? I thought, even though I'm a medium, I'm not qualified to remove a demon. I felt like if I tried or something, that maybe she would attack me. I felt that energy. I felt that hatred, this evil hatred. And I also thought, I had a rosary behind me in my room. And I thought, I'm going to grab that and show it to her. But I still thought to myself, if I do this, she's going to attack me. I thought to myself, should I pray? Like, I was thinking in my head, what should I do? And in that moment, she got up really straight and just ran out of the room. And me and her friend were like really shocked, just confused. She went into the bathroom across the hall from where we were and just started bawling her eyes out, like crying so much. And I just felt so bad. Like I felt scared for her because I knew it was a demon, but it was really difficult for me to tell somebody you have a demon or to tell her friend that she has a demon. Like I didn't know how to approach the situation. I'm pretty sure what I remember is that I recommended her go to like a priest or a pastor, someone that could talk to her more. So I was like, I think she needs more help than I can offer her. Right. And her friend like apologized. She said, I'm sorry. I didn't know. They ended up leaving the house. And I had that same vision of keep the demon outside, and I didn't. And later that day, I received an email from her friend. And she said, look, my friend ended up in the psychiatric unit. So she was really, really struggling. So that was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced in a reading before. People definitely would come to me as well about hauntings in their homes that they were experiencing, stuff like how I grew up. So people would come to me for guidance for stuff like that too. And those were very heavy, like creepy kind of sessions. But that was the scariest thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah, you talked about these spirits not being actually like dead relatives, but being demons. And I think that's a good example of what you're talking about. Because when the spirit took over, the spirit completely took over. That's what happens. When the eyes go completely black, the spirit has taken over the body. And what did the spirit say? The spirit said, keep talking about my mom. Like the spirit doesn't have a mom. It's not actually the mom of the person. It's a facade. It's a deception. So whoever that spirit that was communicating with you was, I'm pretty convinced that from this experience, it shows that definitely it was not the person's mom, but it was something else, potentially with a similar nature as the spirit that was talking to you from inside of her. You told me about another experience that you had that was definitely not as spooky as this one, but it was another one where it confirmed that actually you were hearing things from spirits and accurate information. There's a few ladies that came to you and they learned about it only afterwards. Do you remember that story that you told me?
Yes. So this is just an example of like my regular readings that I was doing. So I had 3 ladies come to me. And they were, looking to talk to their past relatives. They were older women. So I was talking mostly about their parents and stuff who had passed away. But basically, the whole session, there was a man there. And he was very angry. And he was a young man. So I kept asking him, do you know a guy who passed away? He's very angry. And I said, I'm sorry, but I think he's unalived himself. And they couldn't remember. None of them connected to it. None of the ladies. And I said, look, maybe it's someone you knew when you were young and you're just forgetting about this person, like an old friend or something, because that happens. So I told them, please keep in mind this man that's coming through, and he has a very dark energy. And I'm sorry, like, I don't want to scare you guys, but this guy is here. I received an email from them after as well. And she told me when we left the session, I had found out it was like one of her relatives had just unalived himself. And she had only found out after she had got home. So he had maybe done it like right before the session or during. It was within hours. So I believe that demons really, they know these things. They can manipulate any situation. They know what's going on outside of you. They know, they're very smart. They're very smart. That's what I've learned. And they're very smart about Jesus also. And they're very manipulative. So that's something that I've learned to pray against, because, you know, especially through technology today, for example, you can have all kinds of manipulation. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about Jesus, because you mentioned him. This whole time you were calling yourself a Christian, but you were still doing mediumship. We talked about you communicating with these spirits. It would have spooked me, these experiences, but I don't know exactly what your thought process was during this whole time. But obviously, you're not a medium anymore. You talk against it. What happened that made you want to stop?
Okay, so first off, I started to not enjoy it like I used to. It started to become a chore. It was kind of stressful talking to people. And I just wasn't getting any better. My health was declining over the years. I wasn't getting any happier. I didn't feel fulfilled with any of these sessions anymore. So that's one thing that kind of put me off of it just in general. But then I thought to myself, you know, I saw a video online. I started getting a lot of Christian content online. And there was a video that I had seen of someone say, he said, look, a lot of people tell you they're Christian. And then I asked them, okay, well, do you believe in like the Christian Bible? Do you believe in Jesus Christ? Do you believe in the words of Jesus Christ? And they'll tell him, well, no, I don't really believe that part. And I don't believe that part. That's what I was like. I made up this version of Jesus that I felt like was who he was. And Jesus is written in the Bible, right? Like his own words. And I ignored all that. I was like, oh, Jesus is not that. He's whatever version I made up of him. And I knew that instantly when I saw that video. I thought, I need to find the real Jesus again. And I prayed out to him and I said, please, Jesus, like, show me the truth of who you actually are. And right away I heard read the Bible. And then I started seeing more influx of Christian content, just like online. And there was a Jordan Peterson video that I had seen once. And he was also talking about Christ a lot. He brought him up like in a historical sense of, you know, how important the stories of Jesus Christ is, how important just the understanding of it is in our history. And I was like fascinated by that. And then I started reading the Bible again. And I thought to myself, like, I was so ignorant and I was so horrible to like God. And I was so, I was angry at myself for a while because of this. I was sad. And I was like, oh, you know, I missed an opportunity to know Christ for this long. And I remember knowing him when I was a child, like that feeling of Christ. I could see him and I could feel him when I prayed. I could feel him like in my mind's eye, the same way I can see in the mediumship. And now I realize that that's my gift, is being able to like feel and see Jesus. and to be able to be like an empath with people and understand people's feelings and where they come from and stuff. And all the sadness and things that I went through was so that I could possibly relate to people and understand people better. And I think I'm really good at like reading people because of that experience of reading people for so long. But now it's a whole different perspective. I just do everything for Jesus. I put Jesus in my heart. Jesus is first. Jesus died on the cross for our sins. And I respect that so much. Like I humbled myself so much, allowing him to tell me what to do and not me. Before I felt, I guess you could call it powerful in a way while doing these readings. I felt like I was empowering them and empowering myself. And it was all about me. And that's actually why I stopped, because I realized that. I said, this is not about the client anymore. It's not about God. And there was this light switch that turned on that I realized in that one moment. I was like, this is not godly.
Yeah. I think your experience is the experience of many, many, many people where they grow up kind of in the church. They grew up knowing about Jesus, knowing about the gospel, but somehow they never truly grasp it and they make up their own version. And I think it made it very apparent when you listen to that Jordan Peterson thing that you didn't know anything about the Bible and you called yourself a Christian. Because if you had known anything about the Bible, it says to not do mediumship, to not contact the dead, to not do all these things. But you definitely, at least you didn't seem to be aware of that. Once you started reading scripture, once you started surrendering your life to Jesus, how did that kind of change everything else? So I'm talking about the mediumship aspect. I'm talking about the house, the hauntings. I'm talking about sleep paralysis, all these kind of dark things that you were involved in. How did that shift once you kind of actually dedicated your life to God?
So I started to get attacked really bad when I started realizing who God was, bringing the Bible. But then it cleared for a while. Whenever I get really in depth with Christ and I pray for protection, I have to pray daily for my health, for my well-being, for my thoughts, for my anxiety, for my depression. I pray daily now. If I don't, I fall right off and I fall into this like darkness. I saw a quote the other day and it was like, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Like he's our water, he's our air, we cannot survive without God. And for so long, I was trying to survive off of everything. I was so sick, so I was relying on doctors to fix me. I was so anxiety ridden that I was relying on psychiatrists to help me or medication to help me. None of these avenues or things were helping at all. I'm not saying don't take medication if you need it, but that's just my experience. These things were kind of making me worse and I was attacked. But whenever I pray to God, this stuff all clears, all the chaos, all the anxiety, the depression. So as long as I know if I focus on Christ, I don't have to worry about anything anymore. And that's my goal now. It's just pray. Pray. That's your protection. That's your spiritual protection. And humble yourself. I found that was very important for me personally. Because I was trying to, I need this job. I need this. I need that. You need what Christ will give you when Christ gives it to you. Because if you get it earlier, it might corrupt you. If you get it earlier, it might ruin you and destroy you. So there's perfect timing, and I really respect that. I needed to humble myself, so that's what I did.
Amen. I think you're a very good example for a lot of people. And so that's why I'm very happy that you're willing to share your story. We talked about your journey, but we haven't really talked about your dad. How is your dad doing now?
So my dad is, like I said earlier, like such a good guy. He'll talk to anybody. I'll give you an example. When we were little, there was someone trying to cross the road. And I live in a cold climate, so there's snow. And there was a person in a wheelchair and they couldn't go across the street. My dad stopped all the traffic, got out of the car, and walked the guy across the street in his wheelchair. My dad was just a good person. Like, I always remember him doing things for people. He would take the shirt off his back for me. It was just the alcohol that destroyed him, destroyed that side of him, that personality part of him. So he was an alcoholic for about 40 years, very long time. He started drinking when he was about 16 years old. And at around the time, I think he was like 60 years old, he started calling me all the time, right? He would call me all the time anyways, but he would call me very drunk, getting into trouble, all these, not that my dad was causing it. He was just getting into situations that were like dangerous for him because of his alcoholism. You know, he was losing his apartment, stuff like that, like getting into trouble like that. And he would call me and I would say, you know what? When you want to go to rehab or whatever, let me know. And I'd like hang up the phone or he would hang up because he'd get mad at me. And one day, after about a year of doing this, he called me one day and said, okay, I'm ready. And I said, ready for what? And he's like, drive me to like the center. So at the time there was a detox center in my town. So I went to pick up my dad at a hotel because he had gotten like kicked out of his apartment or whatever. He was at rock bottom. And I don't think he really like wanted to. He just had no choice at that moment. So when I picked him up, he was really drunk and we drove him to a detox center. I brought him in. I actually knew a girl that worked there and she was super nice to me. I like communicated with her. I went to high school with her. So she let him in and they took care of him. He was in the facility for 10 days. This was a detox program for 10 full days. And that's a really severe case because they're not supposed to be in that long. So he was given really heavy sedative medication because alcohol is actually one of the most dangerous things to come off of. You can usually die of like seizures, especially 40 years of usage. So you have to go on like a really heavy medication, to transition you. So he stayed for 10 full days. He got out, came to live with me, and then he went to a rehab for 3 months. So currently he's sober. He's been sober for 4 years. Wow. And that's an amazing story. Like, I'm so proud of my dad. He's, like I said, an amazing person. Now he can really shine and be who he's meant to be. And he's like, you know, he prays every day and calls me and gives me scripture and, you know, reads from the Bible. And he's so faithful. And I'm so thankful that essentially through God, it's God who's doing all of this. And, you know, he's happy and healthy so far. So he's doing really well.
That's awesome. I love that part of your story, particularly because of the decision you made when you were 13. You chose to live mainly because you knew that if you went, your dad would suffer, would have a lot of trouble. And so you essentially stayed, seemed like, for your dad for the most part. And now it took a long time, but eventually, you know, you were able to be kind of a catalyst for him to change. And your relationship with God is good. Now his relationship with God is probably, I would assume, a lot better. So I really love that part of the story. I think it's really cool. And to finish off, I always like to ask people, because I think everyone has lived through different situations. Everyone has life advice that it would be valuable for others to listen to. When it comes to you, you were not dabbling, you were a medium. You were calling yourself a Christian. You have an interesting kind of dynamic of life. If you could give advice to a younger person, maybe someone that's in a situation that you were in, doing mediumship or calling themselves a Christian and not really living out the life, anything like that comes to mind, what would you say to them?
Some of the advice I would offer is to read the Bible. A lot of people, like I said earlier, say Jesus Christ did this or he was like this. It's very specific of who Jesus Christ exactly is in the New Testament. There are eyewitnesses. There are direct quotes from Jesus Christ. So if you want to get to know Jesus, read about him. He's there. He's there for you to get to know who he actually is. It's very important not to twist, because that's what the devil will do. He'll twist who Jesus is. So the most accurate information you're going to get about Jesus is from the Bible. That's the most important thing. But I also really like the scripture, come all who are weak and weary, and I will give you rest. So people who are struggling like I was, Jesus is the one that will give you that comfort, that safety, that sense of peace in your life that you're looking for. And, if you're down on your luck and sad and depressed all the time, give your life to someone who wants it, which is Jesus. Don't give up on yourself, because he wants you so bad. He wants you in his life. I think that's really important to say. And as for the mediumship part, a lot of people are really into that because it makes them feel part of something. It makes them feel like they're special, I think, because that's what I felt like. It was like a gift from God. But your gift from God is maybe a little bit different than that. And Satan is possibly leading you down a path of a gift from Satan, right? There's a very big difference. There's a line in the sand, and you have to figure out which line you're going to be on, God's side or the other side. And it's your choice to be on either side. But I'm telling you, if you put your full faith in Jesus, everything will be for the better. So I just think that side of myself, like who I was, that part of me, it was a naivety. It was a sense of being lost, because I was always searching for Jesus, but I didn't know that. I wish I had stopped and just listened to him, listened to what he wanted, not what I wanted. So this sense of selfishness that was there, that I could do it on my own. I could create things on my own, witchcraft and things that I was also doing as well. I was not on the side that I wanted to be on. So it's just, you pick your side, honestly. And Jesus he'll forgive anybody. So if you think you're gone too far, you're not. I think that's a very important message too. But that's pretty much all I have to say. And I just really hope anybody can connect, to the stories that I have, because there's so many different factors that happen in my life with, addictions, curses, mediumship, hauntings. So hopefully whoever can relate to that, or just hear my story and reach out to God, reach out to Jesus Christ. And hopefully you'll truly find who you really are in doing that also. It's like a rediscovery of yourself. It's like a new building of yourself. It's a beautiful thing that I hope everybody can experience. So, yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Almost False podcast. If you enjoyed this story and would like to know more about Natalie, then join us on Locals. We have 3 extra videos there for you to know more about her experiences and the lessons that she took out of them. The link will be in the description. It's free, so don't be scared to come over and check it out. I'll see you there. Stay blessed.